What I've been trying to do, particularly with the virtuous prince, the young Henry, is to say, actually, we've all got him wrong.
Right.
We really do have to go back to that amazing moment of 1509, just coming up now, 500 years ago, 22nd of April, when Thomas More hails him as a second Christ. And we've got to imagine that this man was then a youth, under 18, is capable of making this impact. We've got to ask, why? How? Is it real? I think if Thomas More says it, I'm inclined to believe it. I don't think More was a lawyer. We're talking about lawyers. More wants evidence. More is the hardest-nosed man, I think, in England. Not in the least likely to succumb to enthusiasm or whatever. So if he says Henry is pretty impressive, Henry is pretty impressive. And then, of course, the biography becomes so much more interesting. What goes wrong? Whereas the traditional views of Henry, of course, are entirely loaded to the end. And
yes, indeed.
Yes,
this
and
grotesque figure.
Exactly, this grotesque figure. But also to suggest that somehow that's the real Henry. I mean, it's done most explicitly in Lacey Baldwin Smith's The Mask of Royalty, which argues that we are what we become, which just seems to me to be, teleology, that we are what we finish up. Whereas that deprives the story of its extraordinary excitement.
Yes, and
it's a mythic case of corruption. Henry is a kind of perfection, which is destroyed and turned against itself. Why? How wonderful! It's a theme out of fairy tale. It's a wonderful story.
And Hilary, what about you? Were the representations of Henry that you were very fixed in your mind and that you wanted to sort of have a go at, as it were?
Of course, Robert Bolton about 4 seasons. This is my bête noire.
Well, of course, because you're more, would be unlikely to be played by Paul Schofield.
Absolutely, yes, yes.
Maybe from beyond the grave.
I think, the Robert Bolt story has had its way for too long and been enormously influential. And of course, it's a brilliant stage play. It makes its case wonderfully. And it's so persuasive that we actually begin to accept that this evidence is there and that we do know what happened at More's trial and so on, which we don't. And Cromwell only ever appears in fiction and in film as a pantomime villain. He's someone sort of hissing from the wings and gliding blackly
piece
around.
Of work. A nasty piece of work.
A very nasty piece of work, which I think perhaps in some ways he was. But you see, I think More was a nasty piece of work as well. And I delighted in being able to pitch them against each other.
They were worthy opponents, weren't they?
Marius, in his biography, says, to me, Richard Marius gets closer to More than many writers. And he says that Thomas More and Cromwell were rather alike. He says they were both passionate individuals, fiercely repressed. And I find that very persuasive. And I've tried to capture some of that in the closing stages of my book, when they are head-to-head in a room very like this.
When these characters come into your books, I mean, obviously the focus is on Henry, but when Wolsey or Cromwell or More come in, are you revising the established portrait of them, do you think, or you?
Well, the only one I brought More in, but More only as a young man, and Wolsey is at the end, and I think that is beginning to be a revision. I mean, this is Wolsey the dancer. This is Wolsey, the gay young cleric about court. This is the Wolsey who can actually make his way. You were raising this question about Cromwell. How does somebody completely unknown get on? Yes. But remember, Cromwell had the advantage of piggybacking off Wolsey. Wolsey acts as his starter rocket, his booster rocket. And this is why, of course, Cromwell looks back on Wolsey with such reverence, why he adapts his coat of arms from his and so on. But Wolsey, I think, to understand him, we've again, and the early career is pretty mysterious and badly documented, but the point that I picked on is that he was a school teacher. He has this brief period when he is Latin master at Magdalen College School. And I think so much of his handling of Henry, I mean, when I'd written about it before, I'd talked of it in terms of a kind of substitute father figure. I think that's being a bit highfalutin. I think that you grasp much more what Wolsey was doing with Henry if you see him as a teacher. An absolutely brilliant teacher, who, of course, good teachers understand the young.